Hello, everyone. This is Diane Rasmussen with UK Column, and I'm really happy to have back on our channel today Katharine Gunn, who has been interviewed by Charles Mallett in 2025 and also was one of our featured speakers at our Cheltenham event last year, which was amazing because we met directly across the street from GCHQ in Cheltenham. And Katharine Gunn, as we'll hear about today, was, of course, a former employee of GCHQ and has amazing stories to tell about the incredibly brave and courageous and I'm sure terrifying whistleblowing she did back in 2003 in defense of the British people and indeed worldwide. So Katharine, thanks again for joining us in UK Column again today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Diane.
Oh, it's just great to see you. You're such a supporter of us over the years, and you've created such interest amongst our community of UK Column members and supporters that I thought it would just be great to have you on again and again talk about what you've done, but also, as you and I have had lots of conversations over the past several months about a range of things. Yeah. I just thought it would be great to have some conversation about what's going on in the world and our shared thoughts about things that we've shared over, lots of chats. And just kind of give people some hope and some perspective on some things that I think you can certainly bring to us. So I'm not sure you would like to start from here, but if you want to maybe just for those of us in the audience who might not know your story, I will put a link to the previous interview that you did with Charles Mallett last year. But if maybe you just want to summarize quickly the courageous event or range of events that started back in 2003.
Yeah, okay. So I was working at GCHQ in 2003. I was 25, 26, and I'd only been there for 2 years, and the war on Iraq was very much in the news. And I saw an email while I was at work on a Friday morning, which basically was a request from the American version of GCHQ, NSA, to intercept the secure communications of diplomatic members of the UN Security Council members, to essentially bribe them or even blackmail them into supporting the US invasion of Iraq, because they wanted a legal cover for it, and they were desperate to get the UN to authorize the invasion. And so when I saw the email, I leaked it, and eventually I was prosecuted. And yeah, they eventually dropped the charges against me. So that all happened in 2003 and 2004, which feels like a lifetime ago.
And you had a film made about you. I believe Keira Knightley played you in a film. Was it 2019 it came out?
Very surreal experience. Yeah, I mean, that all came about much, much later. I had no intention of any of that ever happening. But eventually, it did. In 2009, it was released. 2019 rather, it was released. And I'm very pleased with how it was made. Actually, the director, Gavin Hood, he came to meet me personally, and actually pretty much rewrote the script based on interviews with me, and also interviews with the journalists involved and interviews with the lawyers involved. And so the whole thing was very much based on fact and reality. And yeah, I'm really pleased with how it turned out.
That's really good to hear, because there are so many stories that get told in films that are supposedly based on true stories that are actually not. So,
oh yeah, it could have turned out wild. It could have turned out wild, because the first iteration of that script was nothing at all like what really happened. So this is why I say Gavin Hood basically rewrote it, because, you know, when he saw that the original script didn't align with the facts, he said, well, I really need, from his point of view as well, he wanted to tell a truthful story. So credit to him as well as the producer. They really wanted it to be a truthful account. So
that's great. I mean, because your story is based on telling the truth and getting the truth out there, for them to have fictionalized the story would have been ridiculous hypocrisy.
And I mean, the first installment, you know, it was so bizarre. It was obviously they were trying to Hollywoodize it or whatever. They had sort of these scenes where there was some sort of sexual tension between me and the journalist, which is just absurd and obscene, you know. And because at the time, actually, I was newly married, you know, we'd only been married about 6 months when I leaked this email. So the idea that I would be, it was just, ugh.
You know, I guess as well, you know, I'm really happy that you've contributed to our new magazine, The Column. The first issue will be out by the time this interview is aired. And I have to say it's available in the UK Column shop for those who would like to buy a copy. And, you know, we decided that for each issue of The Column, because this is a brand new magazine and we started completely from scratch. For UK Column, it's an interesting thing because it's a return to print, actually. UK Column started when Brian Gersh created the Devonport column back in 2006.
Oh, wow.
And it was originally printed on A4 paper and distributed as a newsletter. And so for us to come back to, or for Brian, I guess, to come back to print after these years of evolving into video and live news and interviews like this one and all of the sort of podcasts that we're doing now, it's a return to print, but it also, I think, is safety in a way, because if the regulators, if Ofcom, if anyone decides, you know, because we're constantly facing these bans and shadow bans and restrictions, that if they were to eventually to say, no, that can't be streamed across the internet anymore, we still have a way to get messages out to our members and subscribers.
Yeah, and having a hard copy print of something, it's definitely, you know, you can share it with other people easily within the family. You can pass it on to neighbors. You can keep it, hopefully, and, you know, let your children or anybody else, you know, read it in the future. And it can't be edited, you know, it can't be changed. Like even digital copies can be altered. It's
exactly. And we're seeing that
it's in print. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're seeing that with, you know, Amazon, Kindle and other things where they are literally going back and changing things that were written one way. And it's easy for them to just go in and edit, copy, paste something that they don't like and change it to something else. So, of course, as viewers who know me know I'm a librarian originally and still will always will be at heart. That breaks my heart when they decide to go in and change something that should be preserved for the future. Right. And you know, it also ties into our first theme, because every issue is going to have a theme, but with other articles included. But the theme for issue 1 just happened to be war, which we decided last year before the recent breakout of things involving Iran. And it's interesting looking back now. I know at this point you haven't seen the articles from the other authors, but it is interesting to look at how we planned it last year to say, okay, here are the issues. Here's what's going on with war, the case for war, like in your article, the propaganda, all of the things that come out and how these things are orchestrated and ultimately the toll on lives and people and societies. I think what we see, including your work, which I'd love to hear you talk about your work as well, but what I'm seeing overall is that it is a system and it is kind of a repetition that is put in place to convince the public that we actually should be going in and killing people. And the propaganda, of course, as you know very well, and all of the things behind what leads us into these situations are absolutely essential to understanding how these things are orchestrated.
Of course. Yeah.
So if you maybe want to talk about your article, your contribution in your words, I think that would be really helpful for people.
Well, I mean, really looking back, over the last 25 years, there is a pattern. And what really always blows my mind is that for a lot of people, including journalists who were involved in my initial case, who who covered my leak, and a lot of the people that I thought were anti the Iraq war ended up being pro most of the other wars. And it was just really, including actually the person who I passed the leak to, the sort of intermediary person who passed it on to a journalist. They were full on supportive of regime change in Syria. And many people were all for regime change in Syria. And it's because I think, from the Iraq war propaganda vantage point, they realized that it's very hard to prosecute a war based on allegations of weapons of mass destruction. And so, these people, they learn, they're constantly evaluating how they've managed to get where they need to go, and the successes and the failures. And so they have to change things if they realize, and there was massive opposition to the Iraq war, but they still managed to bulldoze their way through it. And so they had to come up with something else for all these various other countries that they'd already planned, the 7 countries in 5 years that they'd already planned to take out and disrupt. And so with Libya, there was all this crazy stuff about, giving Viagra to the soldiers so that they would rape people. And so, it was just insane kind of narrative building, just as it was with Syria. Piers Robinson and various others have done amazing work unpicking all the lies they told about Syria, and they're still, unpicking those lies. And it goes to the point where the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons and so on, they themselves became politicized. A very young international organization that was meant to be doing good work and was doing good work originally on Iraq, for example, but it got politicized and it got infiltrated basically, and to the point where it was peddling lies on Syria and about the use of sarin gas and other chemicals by the Assad government on its own people. And why on earth would they do such a thing? And there was no evidence of it. And so, but those lies, they spread around the world rapidly. Everybody is incensed and, up in arms about it. And before anybody's had time to actually check, they've rolled in with their agenda. And we see this over and over and over again. The 40, beheaded babies in Israel. Obviously, that was all a lie. Then I still hear people touting the 300,000 people killed by the Iranian, regime, when there's no evidence of 300,000 people. That's another lie, and it's easily proven because, or disproven really, because just by sheer numbers, it's very difficult to kill 300,000 people. In Gaza, even with the extensive bombardment of entire densely populated areas, within, the first 3 months of bombardment, I'm saying it's a terrible thing. They killed 60,000 people within the first 3 to 4 months of the intensive, extremely intensive bombardment of Gaza. So how on the world could this Iranian government, how did they physically kill 300,000 people in a matter of a couple of weeks? They don't even, they can't tell you how it happened. What happened was around 3,000 people were killed, which the Iranian authorities themselves have admitted to. But then, Trump recently admitted that they actually armed these people who were causing chaos on the streets of Iran. So these are not, they may have started off as people with genuine concerns about cost of living and the way things were going in the country, and they came out to protest. But as soon as there were people on the streets, the agent provocateurs immediately jump into action, and they blow the thing out of all proportion and cause absolute mayhem, and are setting fire to shops and homes and burning people alive in mosques. I mean, these are not your average protesters, clearly. And so when the authorities come in and try to bring about calm, they kill people, other people got killed. Imagine what happened, in the ICE protests in the US. Imagine if those protesters were armed and were shooting at people. Can you imagine what the US authorities would do? So yeah, the last 25 years for me, it's just been case after case of switching the story slightly in order to achieve regime change. And they've managed to do this in 6 of the cases that they wanted to, in 6 countries. Well, Lebanon, they're still trying. Lebanon, Vanessa Beeley knows a lot more about what's going on there. But so now we're at the final country that they wanted to take down, which was Iran. And it's not going well for them, clearly. And I think they suspected that's why they left it to the last, because they knew they had to take out all the other supporting pillars around Iran so that they could successfully take down Iran. But I fear, like people like Brian Beletic as well, fears that this is going to be another one of these long, drawn-out processes, which is, what Syria had to go through. Very long, drawn-out process, to the point where eventually the people were so worn down, so impoverished, so susceptible to corruption, because they were so impoverished, that eventually they could undermine the structure through bribery and so on, and get people to switch sides and topple it. Now, whether this is going to be successful in Iran, I hope not, but I suspect this is how they're also going to try and do it with it.
I remember so clearly now. It sticks with you. I think for those of us who were paying attention during 9/11, and sometimes when I talk to people and I say, well, what woke you up to what's happening in the world? Some people will say it was 2020. Some people will say it was the moon landings. Some people will say other things that have happened over the past several decades. For me, it was 9/11. And it was because I guess at that point, I had remembered as well, growing up in America, I remembered the first Gulf War in sort of 1990. And I remember the fear then. I was in 1990, I was 15. And I remember that fear of watching the coverage on CNN, and that they were apparently the CNN journalists standing in Riyadh with wearing the gas masks and hearing the air raid sirens. And at that age, I was terrified. And I also saw it affecting my family, because my parents were arguing about the reasons for it, where my father was saying it was for the freedom of the American people. My mother was saying it's about oil and money. And all I knew was I didn't like the fact that my parents were fighting and that I was terrified and I couldn't sleep at night. So at that point, obviously, the fear was still affecting me. But by the time 9/11 happened, and again, the fear took over again. But then you start to watch what happened over time, and you started to, I was really at that point getting very interested in global events and politics and US politics, and probably even more than, like you, I guess the average 25-year-old would have been, at that time in 2001. And I was listening to a lot of different radio shows and realizing maybe, why are we going into Iraq if they're saying that Osama bin Laden, this was the story, right? Osama bin Laden and his affiliates were the ones who took down the World Trade Center, going by the official narrative. Why are we going into Iraq? And what does this have to do with Saddam Hussein? And it really, people were just accepting that as fact because it was just out there. Well, the Twin Towers were taken down, so therefore we now have to go and look for these weapons of mass destruction. And so it was interesting to me at that point, and I'm mentioning this because you said in your interview with Charles Mallet that 9/11 was one of the things that started to make you look at what was actually happening. And then that leading into this case for war in 2003. It is interesting to see how those patterns were established back then. And as you've said, the past 25 years, we're still living in it. And now we're at the 25th anniversary of 9/11 this year in 2026. And I also remember thinking about the axis of evil. If you remember George Bush saying the axis of evil, which was apparently the countries that were part of this terror network, which included Iran and lots of countries in the Middle East, as you've discussed. So I'm not sure what you think about that, but it's my observation that this was being set up even back then to say, well, people are going to remembering, 25 years ago, they said, well, this is the axis of evil. Iran is involved. We now need to take them down. And now Trump is just following everything that they've been. Yeah.
I mean, Iran, since 1979, since the Iranian Revolution, has been basically a target, right? Because obviously, I mean, you can go back even further because, in 1954, the British and the American overthrew the democratically elected government in Iran in order to install a more pliable Shah, the son of the original Shah, because they just wanted to take the oil. I mean, this is what it's all about. They want the oil, and they don't want to give a fair price for it. I mean, I think when they said at the time in 1954, they tried to, I mean, they did. There was a lot of propaganda about the president of Iran then, saying he was a communist stooge. He wasn't. He was far, far away from being a communist. I mean, he was a nationalist and perhaps center left slightly, but he simply wanted the Iranians to be able to invest in the country using the oil wealth. And he wanted BP and these big corporations to pay reasonable price for it, like a 50-50 deal or a 60-40 deal. But no, they don't want to do that. They want an 80-20 deal. They want Iran getting 20% of the profits and them creaming 80% of the profits. And this is what you see in other countries, like in Venezuela. When the US goes in, it's like, no, we take the vast majority of the profits. You get left with the crumbs. And so again, this is what Iran is. They're trying to keep the oil wealth for themselves so that they can continue to support their nation, support their people, keep building infrastructure and renewing. I mean, because these things cost money, as we can see with our own crumbling infrastructure in our own countries. If all the profits are creamed off to the shareholders, none of it is invested back into this. A lot, especially the UK, we've got extremely old infrastructure from the Victorian age. And, they got to keep upgrading it to keep up with the increase in volume and increase in population, but they don't. That they haven't been doing for a long time because the shareholders keep taking all the profits. Anyway, I'm on a rant.
That's okay. It's understandable. And it's kind of what you said in your interview with Charles as well. And I completely agree with you that they're good at taking an important cause, let's say the environment, and making it into something that they can profit from, which is interesting when you see what's happening locally here in the UK with things not being funded properly, potholes all over the roads. I keep thinking more and more about this, tires being destroyed, wheels being destroyed because they can't maintain the roads.
Yeah, and the water, water pipes bursting everywhere, and just the rivers being polluted because they're not dredging them properly and they're not keeping the waterways clear, and that's causing floods. And it just goes on and on.
It does. And then we're seeing, climate finance that's where we're taking money, funneling it through the City of London or wherever it's being funneled through to other places. That is, British taxpayer money going into supporting these things, which are not actually beneficial and really not truly helpful for the environment in ways that could be meaningful, but they're not because they're going to wherever the money is going to. And it's disgraceful. But that, there are a lot of things as we could talk about a lot of things going on locally in this country. But because I have you here with me today, I think one of the things that I wanted to hear you talk about, as I'm sure one of the topics that Brian Garish and I in particular cover are issues around child safeguarding and child trafficking and child abuse. And this leads me to, I would like to hear you tell the story about what happened to you and your daughter at an airport just a few months ago. I will leave you to tell the story, if that's okay.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Well, I mean, really, it was just the most bizarre experience. It was the end of January, and that's when, because I'm normally based in Turkey or Türkiye, and so they don't get Christmas holiday, they don't get New Year's holiday. They get their end of first term is end of January, and they get a 2-week winter holiday. So normally what we've done is go back to the UK to visit family around that time. So, it's something we've done routinely. And so this year we went back exactly as we normally do. It's usually just me and my daughter. And so we got this flight. It was with Jet2. And the flight was delayed by 2 hours. So by the time we got on the plane, we were quite tired. It was a evening flight. So, we were hungry, we were tired. We got on the flight with all of our bags. And of course, we tried not to take check bags because, of course, check bags cost an extra, £50. Yeah. So we were like bunging our 2 weeks worth of winter clothing into carry-on luggages. So we were struggling with backpacks and carry-on luggage. And we got on this flight, and the air stewardess, she sort of looked at me, and I know they've done an outbound journey already, and they'd obviously had to wait the 2 hours delay, and then they were going back. So these people had worked quite a long shift already, but nevertheless, she wasn't at all welcoming. She didn't say like, oh, welcome, or how do you do, or how are you, or anything like that. She just said boarding cards. And I was holding both of our boarding cards because, normally I do, even though my daughter's 17, someone's got to hold the boarding cards. And to be honest, I don't really trust her to not lose that little stub. So I was holding both the boarding cards and I passed it to her. And then she said, so my daughter was behind me. She said, is that young lady traveling with you? And I was like, yes, duh. Why else would I give you her boarding card? Anyway, I let that go because I just thought, whatever, weird. And we struggled down to the back of the plane with our bags and got ourselves seated and comfortable. And my daughter was sat on the aisle seat. I was sat in the middle, and there was a bloke, an individual bloke on his own by the window. And, we were minding our own business through the flight. My daughter put her headphones on. She was listening to her music. And it's a 4-hour flight. We got to the UK. At one point, my daughter, now remember this, my daughter got up and went to the loo by herself and came back and sat down. So then we land at the airport in the UK and we go to the exit. And as we're at the exit, I look up and see there are 3 police officers. At first, I don't notice them, but then when they said, is your name Katharine Gunn? I went, yes. And so we were like, what? Anyway, they said, please follow us down the stairs and we'd like to have a word with you on the tarmac. So we go down the stairs and a female officer takes my daughter to one side and I get taken to the other side with 2 male officers. Meanwhile, the rest of the plane is disembarking and there are shuttle buses and they're all piling into the shuttle buses and kind of looking at us like, what's going on there? And so the police officer says to me, do you understand why you're being detained? I said, no. And then he said, well, someone on the plane reported you about child safeguarding concerns. And I was like, what? And I couldn't understand what they were talking about because at first I was like, child safeguarding. So did somebody report me for abusing my daughter? Like, what? So then I got really indignant and I was like, what on earth are you talking about? I'm the best mum in the world.
Of course you are.
And then they were like, we're not disputing that or something like that. But then they said, well, one of the air hostesses believed that your child was a victim, or that they didn't say your child, that young person was a victim because they didn't make eye contact. Hello? What? I was apoplectic. I was furious. I could not believe what they were saying. It eventually clicked that they suspected I was trafficking someone, a young person. Now, my daughter is taller than me. She has darker complexion than me. She looks like my husband. She looks like her father. And she had a head covering. So, we don't really look like we're related. But all you need to do is check our passports, you know. They didn't do that. They didn't do any sort of checks, not on the flight. Nobody on the flight had asked me or her any questions. They had plenty of opportunities to ask her if she was all right. They just suspected, I think, on the basis that she looked different to me and that she was very quiet and she was, not really interacting with me all that much. But they thought, they just got it into their head. For whatever reason, they thought she was being trafficked. And I was just furious. I was absolutely outraged that they didn't, there was no due diligence. I don't think they followed their own kind of guidelines on what are the red flags for trafficking. Because I've actually looked up what are the sort of authorities for, trafficking on airlines, what those guidelines are. And yes, not making eye contact is one of many, as is not holding onto their own boarding card. That's also a potential red flag. But I don't believe you can go off just 2 red flags, because there were no other issues. And like I said, if I had been actually trafficking her, heaven forbid, I would have put her in the middle seat, not the aisle seat. I would have gone with her to the toilet and made sure she didn't talk to anybody, But no, because obviously I'm just a normal person traveling with my daughter on a flight. Of course, Jet2, they refused to acknowledge that they made a mistake. I've complained and complained and complained. I've written letter after letter demanding that I see their internal guidelines, what they use for their basis in assessing whether someone is being trafficked. I've even asked for their internal policies on complaints, and they refuse to give me either of those things. They basically just said, we apologize, and that's it. It's disgusting, frankly, because it caused a lot of distress. We had 300 people watching us throughout this whole entire ordeal. The taxi was delayed. He was trying to get in touch with me, and, I couldn't tell him that I was being questioned by police. In the end, they just left us. They just walked away, actually, at the end. They just turned around and walked off, the police. And my daughter said, because as she was supposedly the victim, the female police officer was very nice to her and said sort of, did you want to come to this country? And she was like, yes. We come every year and I'm the one who wants to come. Oh, who are you visiting? My granddad. And what's his address? And then the female police officer said to my daughter, why do you think your mother is so angry? And my daughter was like, I think there's been a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. And the lady police officer said, yes, I can see there's been definitely a misunderstanding.
Yes.
It's not good enough. You don't just rock up to a plane on the basis that the air hostess decided that she doesn't like the look of these 2 people sat there. She thinks they're fishy. You can't do that.
And so many assumptions, and almost it feels like there's almost a racist element to me that they're just.
I think so. I thought so at the time. I was like, if she hadn't been in hijab, do you think they would have stopped us? I don't think so.
Right, because they could have looked at your boarding cards and your passports and seen, well, yes, these people are related. But no, they're just making assumptions based on appearance and terrible assumptions. It's really horrible. I'm really sorry for what you went through. I can't imagine what that would feel like, being stopped by police for any reason whatsoever at the airport. It must be terrifying.
Wow. And I found it extremely triggering.
Of course you would. Of course you would. You have this experience that, as you would. But, I hope that there's something that, I know you said, I think when we spoke last week, that you're still trying to pursue this and you have a bit more time to get a complaint through. Is that correct? Or
I was thinking of pursuing it through the small courts and basically on the grounds that I believe it was discriminatory, racial discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We'll see.
We'll see. and again, we're talking about distractions, systems, things that distract from what's actually happening. And so if we want to think about safeguarding and child abuse and what things that are real problems, I know something that you have an interest in as well as a mother is the things that I talk about on UK Column a lot around contents of books, children's books, sexual violent content being placed in front of children. And I know you sent me something recently that caused additional alarm for you. If you maybe want to share with the audience what it was that you found, that was very interesting.
Yeah, well, so I'm careful about, what content my daughter has access to. Although you can't control everything. But when she was younger and was an avid reader, I signed up to a clean books list or something like that. So basically, it's so they sent out regular emails about new books or old books that are basically clean. They don't have foul language, they don't have violence, they don't have sexual content, and so on. So recently I got one of these emails, and at the bottom of the email, the author had put a big signage saying, "Please read, please take note." She'd recently been contacted by an author of young adult fiction who, this was back in November 2025, this young adult fiction writer had attended a sort of gathering of publishers and so on. And at that sort of annual gathering of publishers, they had stated that by 2027, they wanted all young adult fiction to contain on-page sexual content. So not just references to it behind closed doors, or not just people discussing it as a topic, but graphic descriptions of sex. And, for young adults, which, as this author had pointed out, often is accessed by children as young as 8 or 9, So anywhere between 8 to 12-year-old or 14-year-old children from 2027 onwards, all books published from 2027, according to this author, every single book will have graphic sexual content. And you got to ask yourself, why? Why is that necessary to sell books? I mean,
yeah, I can share one thing is I have a source who has leaked to me that publishers are basically requiring it already. And I know this from kind of a different channel, which
right.
is publishers that are announcing or looking for commissioning books, that it's actually part of their requirements when you submit a proposal or a manuscript for a child's book, young adult book, that there's some element of sexual content, of, if you want to call it LGBTQ, these general themes.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the publishers will not accept it unless it's got some elements of this in it. The work that I've done on this, I did a talk for the Hope Sussex event that UK Column did in, last year at a festival, the Sounds Beautiful Festival. No, that Sounds Beautiful, Hope Sussex, Katie Jo Murfin's event, where I called it How to Be a Globalist Librarian. And one of the things that they're looking for is they've signed agreements with the UN, even, World Health Organization policies, that are saying that basically this is what they call the UN rights of the child. And what this means is that children have the same rights as adults, and therefore have the right to read about sex, to consent to sex, and they're using this, some people are saying, as a gateway to pedophilia, to, early sexualization of, activity that is not appropriate. And so the publishers have signed agreements with the UN, which then all just gets filtered down into the bookshops and to the libraries and to whoever's stocking and selling this content. So it starts at the top and filters down. So unfortunately, what you're hearing is consistent with other reports that I've been receiving and what I've been finding myself. There is, again, going back to safeguarding, one thing that can happen is, of course, as a social worker said to me, if one of the ways that they used to look for indications of actual child safeguarding issues, not what happened to you and your daughter, but actual issues, is that children know about sex, they know about violence, they know about things that they shouldn't know about at their age, which means that they have then already been indoctrinated or exposed to something. But if all children get it because it's part of the curriculum at schools or it's in the library books, then they can't differentiate, because all children know things that they should know that you and I wouldn't have known about at their age. And so it makes it more difficult for them to pick out those who are being preyed upon or other things happening to them if they're all exposed to the same content. So it is very, very evil, in my opinion.
I mean, I discussed it with my daughter actually, and she was shocked when I pointed that out, that that it, as you just say, that it was blurring the line so that it would be harder to detect. But I mean, we know from all sorts of research that porn is addictive, and that these sort of things, I mean, children who have access to the internet already have access to porn. So, I mean, this has been discussed endlessly. So all this stuff about protecting children online, there's a lot of conflicting, all their narratives just kind of bounce off each other because they're not coherent in any way, shape, or form. So when they talk about, we must censor online content to protect children, on the one hand, bringing in digital ID for everybody, because in order to access the internet, you have to give your digital ID, is how they're obviously trying to push this. But then on the other hand, you've got all these books out in the library and in the bookshops, which are essentially tantamount to porn, you know, in many respects. And then, yeah, I mean, when they talk about children have, on the one hand, all these freedoms, supposedly they have, well, not freedoms, but all these rights. They don't extend the same rights to them, for instance, to drive, because it's not safe for a child to drive. It's not safe for a child to drink alcohol. You know, it's not safe for a child to go off and live on their own. You know, so the rights thing is also a very muddy area, because they say on the one hand, children have the right, based on Gillick competencies, to decide whether they should have contraception, whether they should get the COVID jab, convid jab, as I call it.
Yes.
And, you know, whether they should have cross-sex hormone or hormone blockers and all this kind of thing. That's all based on Gillick competencies, supposedly. So they pick and choose what children have the right to and not have the right to, in a kind of pick and mix bag of assorted sweets. And I think it would be wise to maybe point that out in a way to MPs and others who don't seem to really get the issues, you know, because they're so confused and they can't understand what all the fuss is about, when clearly online harms and all of this thing is a means of censoring people from accessing the sort of information that goes against official narratives that are pumped out by the legacy media.
Yes.
And meanwhile, they don't give a toss about our children, obviously. The whole point is to ensure that the children will grow up believing the narratives that they pump out, and that the children will grow up accepting that they need to be led and guided by the official authorities with the blue tick, you know?
Right. And, you know, it's interesting when you talk about the books and the online issues, because you can go into any high street Waterstones in the UK and go into the children's section and find these books. There's certainly no ID required. You certainly don't have to scan your face or give biometric ID to open up a book sitting on a shelf in your local library or in your bookshop. It's all right there.
Right, exactly.
But then they're using it for these requirements that they're putting in, and starting in, I think Australia's done this recently, and it's going to be spreading more and more. To get on the internet, you have to provide ID, even if you are our age. Whereas any child could walk into a library, and in some cases you don't have to be, I think, maybe over the age of 8 to walk into a library without parents, without any supervision, and grab anything off the shelves anywhere.
Yeah.
So again, we can see there that clearly they're using this as excuses for the sort of digital control and the technocracy and the things that they're placing upon us, which they are using these narratives over the past few years to now make us believe that we're doing this to keep everyone safe. And the Online Safety Act, which Mike Robinson has covered extensively on UK Column.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
That they're using these narratives as methods of control, and they're
Of
really
course,
not.
and they always, and this goes back to the fabricating cases for war, and it's not just for war. They always have to fabricate a case for the measures that they want to roll out to curtail our individual freedoms and rights, because they know they can't get away with it on the face value of it, because we wouldn't accept it on the face value of it. So they always have to concoct something, and I mean, even when people say they will, as a lot of people are home educating because they don't like what's happening in the schools and so on. But I mean, in certain countries, educating at home is illegal. So, you know, they like to, in Germany, I think it's illegal to home educate. In Turkey, it's illegal to home educate unless there are some really special circumstances. So I think, ironically, no matter how bad the UK is and how evil our establishment actually is, and in spite of the fact that we don't have like the US Bill of Rights, in Europe, to some extent, the UK still has a slight degree more freedom. And so for that reason, I think people might be a little bit complacent, possibly, thinking that it couldn't possibly happen, you know, various extremely authoritarian measures. And I think we need to be very wary of that sort of complacency, because ultimately, I'm sure they would absolutely love to crack down and squeeze everyone as much as possible to comply. So, yeah.
So you just said that it's illegal to homeschool in Turkey, where you are. So what would your daughter being 17, what have you found that she has been exposed to in the schools? Is it similar to the Western curriculum where they're kind of putting all this indoctrination in front of children, or have you had more of a say over what she learns in school, or is this even?
Well, they certainly don't have the LGBTQ stuff here in the education system at all. Not at all.
Good.
And I think the people who curate these policies and push them out globally, they're well aware that each country is at different stages in its social acceptance of various agendas. So they tailor it to each country to make it palatable for them. So here in Turkey, it's very much only in the sort of entertainment industries, you know. So if you watch TV, we don't actually have a TV at home, which is a double-edged kind of sword, because actually, although there's a ton of crap on TV, and that's one of the main reasons I didn't want to have a TV, is just it's just so utter mind rot, so much of it.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you know, my Turkish would have been absolutely perfect by now if we'd had a TV in the house and I was watching it. And my husband said my daughter's Turkish language, although she's bilingual, but he said her Turkish isn't as high a standard at it as it would have been if she'd been watching TV regularly. So, because actually in Turkey, I'm not sure there's the same sort of dumbing down as there is in the UK, to the extent that media, the language that you use on media platforms is not the same language you use with your friends in a conversational tone. So, you know, like you'd get a much more varied vocabulary and understanding of different ways of phrasing things. However, yeah, they do cover the whole climate stuff. That's definitely in there, woven into all of their textbooks and so on. And ever since she was little, you know, the teachers would bang on about, oh, how we have to switch to electric. They don't, but they never really drill into any of this stuff. It's just, so none of the kids really understand it or buy into it really. So yeah, the LGBTQ plus stuff is even though her friends joke about it, I mean, they're aware of it. They're obviously aware of it, and they joke amongst themselves like, "Oh, I'm bi or I'm gay or whatever." But as far as I know, no, I mean, they even have most of her, all of her friends. They think it's ridiculous that you should say that you're a boy if you're a girl, and vice versa.
Well, you know, that's interesting. When I went to Riyadh in 2019, for when I was still in the university system, and I was going over there I was supervising a female research student based in Saudi Arabia. And I was asked to come over for a visit. And when I was going through my process of being accused of misgendering and transphobia and all of these things that, for people who know my story of why I am no longer in the university system, having left as a full professor. But one of the things I was using in my defense when I was going through all of these disciplinary hearings and things, and I said, when I went into Riyadh in 2019, and if I had said at the border at the airport that I was identifying as a man and therefore did not have to wear the hijab or the abaya, do you think that that would have been okay for me? Because it's Riyadh and it's, you know, obviously the strictest. But they said that was not an inclusive way of looking at things. That was their argument. On the Western side, I'm like, well, actually, it's more inclusive because I'm in their country and I need to respect their customs and their laws. And it wasn't comfortable for me, but I did it because I'm a guest in their country. And but they don't see it that way. It's interesting to me how they're using this again. They're saying it's inclusive, but actually it's exclusive to people who don't see things. And
yeah, I mean, whole sectors of society, whether they're conservative Christians or Orthodox or, you know, Catholic, or, I mean, I know a large part of the Anglican Church and even the Catholic Church to some extent is being gradually pushed in that direction.
Yeah.
I think the Muslim faith is probably one of the most conservatives in that respect. Presumably the Orthodox Jewish faith is not accepting of it either, because they have very strict gender roles, I think, in the Orthodox Jewish faith.
Yes. Yes. So it's interesting to see the Greens, who are experiencing right now a surge in the polls for the elections coming up in May. But it will be interesting to see what happens, because they're trying to support the LGBTQ plus as well as the Muslims, and those seem at odds. And, yeah,
absolutely. And you know, everyone is so heavily propagandized. You've got all these young, youthful kids coming out of university who've all watched the genocide in Gaza, and so they're all very much anti-war, anti-genocide. But at the same time, they've had all of this programming or propaganda about the whole LGBTQ thing, and about the climate and all this. So the Greens are being the Green Party, which I think is basically all the parties that get any airtime are obviously acceptable to the establishment. The establishment believes they can be used to their own ends. So I'm sure it's, and also that Polanski guy is extremely fishy.
Definitely. And
so as you say, it will be interesting. I think it's going to be very hard to for the younger generation to see through those things, because I think when you're very young and that's part of your core education, I don't know, maybe they'll come around. Maybe, they'll realize that actually what they learned at school was a load of hogwash.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's happening now, just because having been in education for 20 years, something sort of shifted a bit, because I was taught, or at least it's to some extent, taught how to think, how to do critical thinking, how to question. But it's now more like, here's what to think, and here's what people call it indoctrination, if you want to call it that, for lack of a better term. That it's no longer, this is the truth, this is what you need to know, and this is, rather than, let's look at the evidence, do we agree, do we have a different opinion, can we talk about it? That has largely gone away. And as well, I would say, especially in the past couple of years, with the advent of AI essay writing and exams, so people are using ChatGPT or whatever tools to write papers, rather than coming up with it themselves. And it was one of the things that I strongly opposed before I exited the matrix, because I thought, these students are asking GPT to write their papers, why should they end up with the same degrees that we did when we actually worked hard for what we have?
Right.
And they're only hurting their own education and ultimately the ability to apply human thought and consciousness to the world, rather than whatever the computer is just generating and spitting back to them. Nobody really wins in the end, but
no. In fact, it sets people up for failure.
Yeah.
And as somebody recently, I heard in a video recently, the guy said basically all LLMs and AI is, or ChatGPT, those types of apps are any good for is just to facilitate more grifting, enabling more grifting. And we see that in terms of the type of content and the type of, even newspaper articles and all sorts of things that are probably all. And I see a lot of these stories on Facebook, feel-good stories, heroic stories. And all of it, I believe, is all just made up AI gunk. And a lot of people resonate with it because they are feel-good stories. They are wonderful, heroic stories. It didn't happen, or maybe it did, but nobody recorded it. But I think, actually, I recently watched something where they said that this whole AI thing is a massive bubble. It's an enormous, massive bubble that is being propped up because well, it's being propped up at the minute because the companies like NVIDIA and OpenAI they're just buying each other's stock, and it's going round and round and round. It's like, I'll give you this 100 million, and that they'll give it to that person, and that person will give it to that person, and they'll give it back to me. And it just goes round and round and round. So, there's no real, there's an AI thing for Zoom. I don't want to use it. I'm not going to use it.
That's right. Yeah. I was in getting my eyes examined recently, and the optician who did my exam said, "Oh, you're a journalist. You must love AI."
What?
Yeah. I said, "No, actually, I prefer to do my own reporting and research." But he said, "Oh, I love it. I talk to it when I'm lonely. I live alone." So, yeah. So it was just like, just finish my eye exam, please. Let's not go there.
But how many people would pay to just talk to AI? Do you think it's a profitable model?
It seems like at this point that they are doing so, and even looking at, I remember when I looked at the sort of academic AI, there are levels of output that you can get from these specific like essay writing tools, where you can say, well, you can get this essay for free, but if you want to make it sound like it was written by a human, or if you want real references, you have to pay.
Yeah,
so you can get the ultimate worst rubbish for free, but if you want it to be a little bit more convincing to your lecturer, then you have to pay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I don't think. Yeah. I think the actual paid usage of AI is very low. I think I recently read it's something like as low as 3% of people who pay for AI products.
Yeah, you can get, because I've played with them a bit. There are things like you can pay for more prompts and responses. You can pay for image generation. You can pay for music generation. It just depends on how much you want to use and what you want to do with it.
So, yeah. But I think most sane people don't want to see AI. Like my daughter loves art, and she can spot AI art in a jiffy because because she's just looked at so many images that were hand drawn previously compared to what's available now, and she hates it. She completely wishes it would go away. She doesn't want to interact with AI apps. She wants to create her own thing. She doesn't want to prompt AI to create something for her, and I would expect most people are like that. Why would you be proud of something that was created based on just you prompting this software program to create for you?
Right. And there's no humanity behind it. It's reproducing patterns.
Yeah.
So what it can do is you can prompt it to say, as somebody, obviously, as an editor and a writer myself, I can say, well, write me a sonnet in the style of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
So it can follow and look up his patterns and say, okay, here's 14 lines of poetry and it rhymes and it has the right number of syllables. But there's no feeling or anything behind it. It's just reproduction. Right. And that's all it can do.
And I think we all, this is a fact that we all can recognize, and it's all already been recognized to a large extent in academic material, that we are social beings, and our mental health is based upon being able to interact with other human beings.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, they know this. They know this so well. And so any kind of narrative that you can have an AI friend or you know, it's just, I think eventually it's a fad. I think it's a fad. I think people will grow tired of it. And there will be a segment, maybe society of maybe some people who, for whatever reason, they'd much rather just interact with this kind of technology because they can't handle other people for whatever reason. But I think on the whole, people will just get really tired of this and just drop it, just not use it. And so these data centers that they claim they're building, they're not building apparently either. So although there are quite a few already, there are nowhere near the number of data centers that they've actually said that they will be operating. And as the whole Iran war progresses, you know, the access to all the materials they need to, first of all, build the data centers, never mind to run them. And it's just not gonna happen. So I think it's a huge bubble that eventually is gonna implode. And yeah, I mean, we're living in such turbulent times that most people, you know, we none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow, really. And this sense of precariousness has everybody on edge, you know, I think. And it was sort of like how Matt, Desmet,
yes,
who described the psychology of
mass formation psychosis.
Yeah. Most people in the UK, and not just in the UK, but in a lot of places, you know, they're just struggling to get by. They're just trying to do all the things they need to do in order to get by. And so they don't want to discuss these issues. They don't want to understand them deeply. They don't have the time to understand them deeply. And it's very hard to get through to them at this point, I find, is that they'd rather not know because there's already so much on their plate, you know? And I think people don't really start, the people in that kind of frame of mind, they don't start to become engaged until it actually impacts them. Something actually happens to them, you know? So if the police knock on their door, or if that localized lockdown occurs to them, where they're not allowed to go outside of their community, so how do we get those sorts of people to engage? I don't know. I think maybe we have to just those of us who are already well aware of how this stuff goes on, to get together, like UK Column gets together regularly. And when you meet offline and you start building real relationships, real community, you can start offering solutions to each other, workarounds. You know, for example, well, I know this isn't sort of a really big thing where you can really push back and change everything. But it's just an example of how you can have a different mindset and try and protect everybody, not just yourself. So a lot of people are facing job losses, especially in the academic world, like you were describing, you know. And so a lot of people are being told, well, we're going to, in this section, we're going to axe this number jobs. So you're going to have to start preparing for alternatives. And, you know, there may be a possibility that you could reapply for the remaining jobs that we have in this section, but otherwise you will have to look elsewhere. Now, I know this family where a university professor was in this boat, and he saw other departments where a lot of infighting, a lot of backstabbing was going on because they were under pressure. They knew that the department was axing a number of positions, so they were all fighting amongst each other in order to be the one that stayed there. And that didn't sit right with him. He was thinking, I really wish there was another way we could get around this. And he thought, well, what if I take a pay cut? And how about my colleagues take a pay cut? And then we save the sum of money that they're wishing to save by getting rid of us. So he negotiated with his colleagues and he talked to them and he was like, look, this is what I'm thinking. You know, if I take a 30% pay cut, then my tax rate goes down and I get an extra day in the week where I don't have to do the admin or the stuff that they currently want me to do, so I can do the things that I actually want to do. And we all get to keep our jobs. So what do you think about that? And apparently they all bought into this idea and they all agreed to do it. So they came up with their proposal and they submitted it to the department and to the university, and the university accepted. And they said, okay, if that's your workaround, that's your solution, we can work with that. They all kept their jobs. They all took a certain amount of a pay cut. Some of them actually that benefited or sort of evened everything out because they got their tax rate went down, as I said, and they got a few more hours to work on the things that they would rather work on. And I think, you know, that was an example to me of how within the confines of these really negative forces, that if you tap into your humanity and you tap into the idea that you don't want to do unto others what you don't want them to do unto you, you know. So if you try to look at it in a holistic way, you can achieve something that's more beneficial for everybody. And as it happens, it actually boosts department morale because there was no infighting, no backstabbing. And they were like, yeah, we've got each other's back. And so it had a unifying effect. I think even amongst like the whole alternative media, there's a way of looking at that as an example of also how, because even, so as each alternative news or podcasting organization or individual suffers some sort of attack, they're not the opposition. You shouldn't look at them as like, oh, well, now we're going to get more viewers because they've been taken off, so we'll get all their viewers. I mean, that's not the right mental attitude to have,
No, we should all be aiming toward the same goals and having the same things that we're trying to get out to the world. And it's very destructive, honestly. And it's difficult to watch for many reasons. And I really wish personally it didn't happen. But I think your comments there are a really inspiring way to end, because one of the things that I was hoping that we could get out, and I think we have in this conversation, talked about the importance of humanity and fighting everything that they seem to want to have in store for us. But I think it's going to be this connection, this community, this friendship, as you and I have developed, the relationships that UK Column even has with its own members and our supporters, and the wider world, hopefully. It's my belief that we start small and grow big. So we have our small networks, we have our small groups of friends, we have our small stand in the park groups, whatever it is that we have. And then those little groups network out and become bigger groups. And then that's when we get really able to make a difference, because we all do what we can individually. We all do what we can as smaller communities. But if we're all doing our own things and we all join up eventually, then that, I believe, is the way that this is all going to be successful and bring that return back to humanity, to human thought and consciousness, as I said, which does take some effort. But if everyone does something, I think it can happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be big.
Do what you can with what you have. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyways, I hope you agree that's a great place to end this conversation. Thank you again, Katharine, for joining us. I've really enjoyed it.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for your magazine article, which I hope everyone will read, in issue 1 of the column, which is available now in the shop. And thanks again for your time and for your contributions over the past several months to the UK column. And I hope you will continue to engage with us at some level, whether it's in the column or elsewhere. And I hope to see you next time you are back visiting up here in the Northeast.
Yeah, we can climb that tower there.
Well, we'll think about it. It is a beautiful setting of Durham, I would say. Durham Cathedral. It's an amazing place. You were the first person to take me there in person, so really enjoyed that.
Really?
Yeah. I just never made it up there at that point. So thank you again, and have a wonderful springtime, and we will see you again soon. So thank you again.
Yeah. Take care. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.